The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his uniform for the third time. Today wasn't just another day at the Veterans Memorial Ceremony. Today his father's name would finally be added to the Wall of Honor. 35 years after his death in Vietnam, Marcus had been a security guard at the memorial for 8 years, but he had never attended a ceremony as a family member. The irony wasn't lost on him that he spent every day protecting a place that held such personal meaning. Yet he had never truly confronted his own connection to it. His hands trembled slightly as he pinned his father's Purple Heart to his dress uniform. The medal had been sitting in a drawer for decades, wrapped in tissue paper and buried beneath old photographs and letters he couldn't bring himself to read. His mother had given it to him when she passed 5 years ago, along with a box of his father's belongings that Marcus had never opened. "You look good, son," said Colonel Peterson, the base commander, as he approached Marcus near the memorial wall. "Your father would be proud." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. He had only been 2 years old when his father died, and everything he knew about the man came from stories his mother told and a handful of faded photographs. Staff Sergeant James Thompson had been a medic who died saving 3 wounded soldiers during a firefight in the Mekong Delta. The Purple Heart was awarded posthumously, along with a bronze star that Marcus had never seen. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock sharp. Families gathered in neat rows of folding chairs, while military personnel stood at attention around the perimeter. Marcus took his position near the eastern wall, his usual post, but today felt different. Today he was both guardian and grieving son. As the chaplain began his opening remarks, Marcus noticed a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, fidgeting in the front row. The child wore a miniature military uniform that was clearly too big for him, and he clutched a small American flag in one hand while wiping his nose with the other. His mother, a woman in her early 30s wearing a black dress, kept putting her arm around him and whispering something in his ear. Marcus recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same expression his mother had worn for years after his father's death, a mixture of pride and profound sadness that never quite went away. The woman was probably receiving her husband's posthumous medal today, just as Marcus's mother had done 3 decades ago. The ceremony proceeded with military precision. Names were read aloud, and family members came forward to receive medals or certificates. Each story was a testament to sacrifice, but Marcus found himself thinking about the stories that never got told. The everyday moments that families lost when their loved ones didn't come home. When Colonel Peterson called staff Sergeant James Thompson, Marcus felt his chest tighten. He watched his father's name being unveiled on the memorial wall, etched in black granite alongside hundreds of others. The letters seemed small against the vast expanse of stone, but they represented a life cut short, a son who grew up without his father, and a wife who raised that son alone. After receiving the certificate commemorating his father's addition to the memorial, Marcus returned to his post. The ceremony continued, but his mind wandered to memories he wasn't sure were real or imagined. Did he actually remember his father's voice, or had he constructed that memory from old home movies? Was the smell of aftershave that sometimes triggered unexpected emotions really his father's, or just his mind playing tricks? As the final speaker took the podium, Marcus noticed the young boy from the front row had wandered away from his mother. The child was standing near the memorial wall, running, his small fingers over the engraved names. His mother was deep in conversation with other military families and hadn't noticed his absence. Marcus approached the boy quietly, not wanting to startle him. "Those are important names," he said softly. The boy looked up with serious brown eyes. "My daddy's name is going to be up there too," he said matter-of-factly. "Mommy says he's a hero, but I just want him to come home." The simple honesty of the statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child was living the same story Marcus had lived, but from the beginning. The boy would grow up with questions that could never be fully answered, and a hole in his life that would never be completely filled. "What's your daddy's name?" Marcus asked, kneeling down to the boy's level. "Captain David Rodriguez," the boy said proudly. "He was in Afghanistan. Mommy says he saved a lot of people before the bad guys hurt him." Marcus glanced back at the ceremony and saw the woman he assumed was the boy's mother now looking around. Frantically, he stood up and waved to get her attention, and relief flooded her face when she saw her son was safe. As she hurried over, Marcus could see she had been crying. Her makeup was smudged, and she clutched a folded flag against her chest. With both hands, "Thank you," she said breathlessly as she reached them. "Sorry, Miguel, he has a hard time sitting still, especially at things like this." "No need to apologize," Marcus said. "I'm Sergeant Thompson. I work security here. I'm Maria Rodriguez," she replied. "And this is Miguel. We're here for—" Her voice caught slightly, "for David's ceremony." Marcus nodded. "I saw your husband's name on the program. I'm here for my father today, too. He died in Vietnam when I was about Miguel's age." Maria's expression softened. "I'm so sorry. It's hard, isn't it? Trying to honor someone you barely remember." "The hardest part," Marcus said, "is wondering who you might have been if they had lived." As they spoke, Miguel had returned to tracing names on the memorial wall with his finger. Marcus watched the boy and saw himself 30 years ago, a child trying to understand loss, too big for his young mind to comprehend. The ceremony was winding down. Families began to disperse. Marcus knew his shift would continue for several more hours, but something had changed during those few minutes of conversation. For the first time in years, he felt connected not just to his duty as a guard, but to his identity as a son who had lost his father in service to his country. As Maria and Miguel prepared to leave, the boy tugged on Marcus's uniform sleeve. "Will you take care of my daddy's name?" he asked seriously. Marcus looked down at the child and made a promise he knew he would keep for the rest of his life. "Every single day," he said solemnly. "That's what I'm here for." The simple exchange planted a seed that would grow into something much larger than Marcus could have imagined. 3 weeks after the memorial ceremony, Marcus found himself thinking about Maria Rodriguez and her son Miguel more often than he expected. Something about their conversation had stirred feelings he had kept buried for years. During his quiet moments at the memorial, he would find himself standing near the section where Captain David Rodriguez's name would soon be engraved, wondering how the family was adjusting to their new reality. On a cloudy Thursday morning, Marcus was surprised to see Maria walking through the memorial gates. She wasn't alone. Miguel skipped beside her, and an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes followed behind them. Maria carried a small bouquet of yellow roses, and Miguel clutched the same American flag he had held during the ceremony. Marcus approached them with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Rodriguez. I didn't expect to see you back so soon." Maria looked up, and Marcus noticed the dark circles under her eyes had deepened since their last meeting. "Oh, Sergeant Thompson. Hello. Miguel wanted to see where his father's name will be placed. The engraving should be finished by next week." The elderly woman extended her hand to Marcus. "I'm Carmen Rodriguez, David's mother. Maria has told me about you. Thank you for being so kind to them at the ceremony." Marcus shook her hand warmly. "It's my honor, ma'am. Your son served with distinction." As they walked toward the memorial wall, Miguel ran ahead to find the spot where his father's name would appear. Marcus noticed how the boy seemed more comfortable here now, as if the memorial had become a familiar place rather than a source of confusion. "Miguel comes here in his dreams," Maria said quietly to Marcus. "He tells me he talks to his daddy here. I don't know if that's healthy or not, but our counselor says it's his way of processing the loss." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I used to do the same thing when I was his age. I would have entire conversations with my father in my head. Sometimes I still do." They reached the section of wall where David's name would be added. Miguel placed his small hand on the smooth granite and closed his eyes. Marcus watched the boy's lips move silently, and he felt a familiar ache in his chest. Carmen Rodriguez noticed Marcus's expression. "You lost your father young too, didn't you?" "Yes, ma'am. I was 2 when he died in Vietnam. His name was added to this wall just last month." "Then you understand," Carmen said softly. "The wondering, the questions that never get answered." Over the next hour, Marcus found himself sharing stories he had never told anyone. He talked about growing up feeling like half of his identity was missing, about choosing a career in security because it felt like a way to protect something important, and about the box of his father's belongings, he still couldn't bring himself to open completely. Maria listened intently. "David left letters," she said eventually. "One for Miguel to read when he turns 18, and others for birthdays and important milestones." "I don't know if that makes it easier or harder. Your husband was wise," Marcus replied. "Didn't have that chance." Everything ended so suddenly. Miguel had been quietly listening to the adult conversation while tracing patterns on the memorial wall. Suddenly, he turned around with the serious expression that seemed to be his constant companion. "Sergeant Marcus," he said, using the name he had decided to call him, "do you think our daddies know each other up in heaven?" "Duh." The question caught Marcus off guard. He looked at Maria, who nodded encouragingly, then knelt down to Miguel's level. "I think they might, buddy. They were both soldiers who cared about helping people. I bet they have a lot to talk about." Miguel seemed satisfied with this answer. "Good, then my daddy isn't lonely." As the family prepared to leave, Carmen Rodriguez pulled Marcus aside. "That boy needs male figures in his life," she said directly. "Maria is strong, but she's struggling. If you ever have time to spare." Marcus felt a familiar weight of responsibility, but this time it didn't feel burdensome. "I'm here most days, ma'am. They're welcome to visit any time." After they left, Marcus returned to his usual duties, but his mind kept wandering to the conversation. That evening, when his shift ended, he drove to his apartment and sat staring at the unopened box of his father's belongings that had been gathering dust on his closet shelf. For the first time in 5 years, he lifted the box down and placed it on his kitchen table. Inside, beneath layers of tissue paper, he found medals he had never seen, photographs that brought tears to his eyes, and letters his father had written to his mother during his deployment. One envelope was addressed, "Simply to my son." Marcus's hands shook as he opened it. The letter was brief but powerful. "If you are reading this, it means I won't be coming home to watch you grow up. Know that every day I was away, I thought about the man you would become. Be kind, be brave, take care of your mother. And remember that love doesn't end with death, it just changes form. You will always be my greatest achievement. Love, Dad." Marcus sat in his empty apartment and cried for the first time since his mother's funeral. But these weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of connection, of finally understanding that his father had thought about him even in those final moments. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work with a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just guarding a memorial anymore. He was protecting a sacred space where families came to connect with their lost loved ones. When he saw Maria and Miguel approaching the gates later that week, he greeted them not as a security guard but as a friend. Miguel ran up to him excitedly. "Sergeant Marcus, Mommy says my daddy's name is ready to see." They walked together to the memorial wall, where David Rodriguez's name now appeared in fresh, crisp engraving. Miguel reached up to touch the letters, and Maria placed her hand over his. "Hi, Daddy," Miguel whispered. "This is my friend Sergeant Marcus. He takes care of your name every day."
Oh.
Marcus felt something shift inside him. For years, he had been protecting this place out of duty and a vague sense of connection to his father's memory. Now, watching Miguel talk to his father's name on the wall, Marcus understood that he wasn't just guarding granite and bronze. He was safeguarding love that refused to die, hope that persisted through grief, and connections that transcended death itself. That afternoon, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He approached Colonel Peterson with a proposal that had been forming in his mind since meeting the Rodriguez family. "Sir, I'd like to request permission to start a support group for families of fallen soldiers. Something informal, maybe meeting here at the memorial once a month." Colonel Peterson raised an eyebrow. "That's outside the scope of your security duties, Thompson." "Yes, sir. But I think it might be exactly what this place needs. Not just security, but community." As Marcus explained his idea, he thought about Miguel's question about whether their fathers knew each other in heaven, which maybe they did, and maybe they had sent their children to find each other for a reason. The seed planted during their first meeting was beginning to grow into something beautiful. 2 months later, the first meeting of what Marcus had decided to call Memorial Connections took place on a warm Saturday afternoon. He had spent weeks planning, sending letters to families in the area, coordinating with the base chaplain and counseling services. Despite his preparation, Marcus felt nervous as he arranged folding chairs in a semicircle near the memorial wall. Maria and Miguel arrived first, along with Carmen Rodriguez. Miguel carried a small notebook that he had decorated with stars and /N stripes. Stickers. Maria looked more rested than she had in their previous meetings, though Marcus could still see the weight of loss in her eyes. "I brought pictures," Miguel announced proudly, holding up his notebook. "Mommy helped me make a book about Daddy." Soon, other families began to arrive. There was Janet Williams, a widow in her 70s whose husband had died in Korea, accompanied by her adult daughter Susan. The Patel family came together, Raj and Priya with their teenage son Arjun. Honoring Priya's brother who had been killed by an IED in Iraq, Marcus was particularly moved when he saw Tom Bradley, a Vietnam veteran, in his 60s, walk slowly toward the group using a cane. Tom's son had died in the Second Gulf War, making him both a veteran and a Gold Star father. As people settled into their chairs, Marcus felt the familiar nervousness he always experienced before speaking to groups. But looking at the faces around him, each carrying their own burden of loss, he found his voice. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I know this isn't easy. Talking about our loved ones who died in service brings up a lot of emotions. But I've learned something over the past few months. Grief shared as grief lightened, and love shared as love multiplied." Janet Williams nodded approvingly. "My Harold died in 1953, she said in a clear, strong voice. "I've been carrying this alone for 70 years. When I got your letter, I thought it might be time to try something different." Miguel raised his small hand like he was in school. "Mrs. Janet, do you still miss Mr. Harold?" Janet's eyes softened as she looked at the boy. "Every single day, sweetheart. But over the years, I've learned that missing someone doesn't have to hurt so much. Sometimes it can feel warm instead of sad." Tom Bradley shifted in his chair and cleared his throat. "My boy Kevin was 24 when he died, same age I was when I came back from Vietnam. I used to think it was unfair that I survived when he didn't. Survivor's guilt, the doctors call it." Marcus leaned forward. "How did you work through that feeling?" "I haven't completely," Tom admitted, "but I started volunteering at the VA hospital. Helping other veterans seemed to honor Kevin's memory. Like maybe I survived so I could help others who made it home." The conversation flowed naturally from there. Carmen Rodriguez shared stories about David's childhood and his decision to join the military. The Patel family talked about their struggle to balance, honoring their brother's sacrifice while dealing with community members who questioned the war he died fighting. Arjun Patel, who was about 17, spoke up quietly. "Sometimes I feel angry that my uncle died for a war that people say was pointless, but then I think about the soldiers he served with who came home because he was there." Maria reached over and squeezed Arjun's hand. "Your uncle's service mattered, regardless of politics. Yes. David always said that soldiers don't fight for wars, they fight for each other." As the afternoon progressed, Marcus noticed something remarkable happening. The initial awkwardness was melting away, replaced by genuine connection. These families, who had been carrying their losses alone, were finding comfort in shared understanding. Miguel had been quietly drawing in his notebook throughout the meeting. Finally, he stood up and walked to the center of the circle. "I drew all of our daddies and uncles together," he announced, holding up his notebook. The page showed stick figures in military uniforms, standing in a group with wings and halos. Sergeant Marcus helped me spell all their names. The drawing was simple, childlike, but it captured something profound. Each family member was represented, standing together in Miguel's innocent vision of heaven. There wasn't a dry eye in the circle. Janet Williams wiped tears from her cheeks. "That's beautiful, Miguel. May I take a picture of it?" As the meeting came to a close, people lingered, reluctant to break the sense of community they had created. Tom Bradley approached Marcus privately. "Son, this is good work you're doing. These families need this connection. I have to ask, what do you need?" The question surprised Marcus. He had been so focused on helping others that he hadn't considered his own healing process. I guess I need to understand who my father really was, Marcus said honestly. I've spent so many years protecting his memory that I never really got to know him as a person. Tom nodded thoughtfully. Have you reached out to any of the men who served with him? Marcus shook his head. I wouldn't even know where to start. Leave that to me, Tom said with a slight smile. Us old soldiers have our ways of finding each other. Over the following weeks, the impact of that first meeting rippled through Marcus's daily routine. Families began visiting the memorial more frequently, not just to grieve, but to connect with each other. Miguel and his mother came by twice a week, and Marcus found himself looking forward to their visits. Miguel had appointed himself as an unofficial tour guide, eagerly showing new visitors around the memorial and telling them about all the heroes. On the wall, his innocent enthusiasm had a healing effect on everyone who encountered him. One evening, as Marcus was preparing to end his shift, Tom Bradley appeared at the memorial gates with a weathered man in his 70s. Marcus, Tom called out, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Eddie Nakamura. He served with your father in Vietnam. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. In all his years of wondering about his father, he had never met anyone who actually knew him as a person rather than just a name on military records. Eddie Nakamura extended his hand with a warm smile. Your dad saved my life twice in Vietnam, he said simply. I've been wanting to meet you for 35 years. As they shook hands, Marcus felt a connection to his father that was stronger and more real than anything he had experienced before. This wasn't just someone who had read about Staff Sergeant James Thompson in military files. This was someone who had shared meals with him, laughed at his jokes, and witnessed his bravery firsthand. Would you like to sit down and talk? Marcus asked, gesturing toward a bench near the memorial wall. Son, Eddie said, settling onto the bench, I have stories about your father that will make you proud and help you understand the man he was. But more than that, I can tell you about the man he hoped you would become. As the sun set behind the memorial, Marcus prepared to learn about his father, not as a mythical hero, but as a real person who had dreams, fears, and an unshakable love for the son he would never get to raise. The seed that had been planted months ago was growing into something that would transform not just Marcus's understanding of his father, but his understanding of his own purpose in life. Eddie Nakamura's weathered hands gestured animatedly as he spoke, bringing Marcus's father to life in ways that military records and his mother's careful stories never could. They had been sitting on the bench for over an hour, and Eddie showed no signs of slowing down. Your dad wasn't the biggest guy in our unit, Eddie said with a chuckle, but he had this way of making everyone feel safe. He'd crack jokes during the worst moments. Always had extra rations for guys who were struggling, and he could patch up anything from a skinned knee to a serious wound. Marcus absorbed every detail hungrily. What did he talk about when things were quiet? You and your mother? Mainly, Eddie replied without hesitation. He carried your baby picture in his helmet, and he must have shown it to every soldier in Vietnam. He used to say he was fighting to get home to teach you how to throw a baseball and help you with your homework. The image hit Marcus powerfully. His father hadn't been an abstract hero dying for his country. He had been a young man desperately trying to survive long enough to be a dad. He talked about the house he wanted to buy when he got home, Eddie continued. Said he wanted a big backyard where you could play, and a workshop where he could build you a treehouse. Your mother probably never told you that part. Marcus shook his head. His mother had focused on his father's bravery and sacrifice, but she had rarely shared his ordinary dreams and plans. Tell me about the day he died, Marcus said quietly. Eddie's expression grew serious. Are you sure you want to hear this? I need to know. Eddie was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. We were on patrol in the Mekong Delta, got ambushed by a larger force than we expected. 3 of our guys went down in the first few minutes, Rodriguez, Martinez, and a kid named Sullivan, who was only 19. Marcus noticed that Eddie still remembered their names after all these years. The enemy had us pinned down, and those 3 wounded soldiers were caught in the open with no cover. Your father didn't hesitate. He grabbed his medical bag and ran straight into enemy fire to reach them. Eddie paused, his eyes distant with memory. I was one of the wounded, took shrapnel in my leg and couldn't move. But your father dragged me too. Cover first patched me up enough to stop the bleeding, then went back for the others. He got Martinez to safety, then went back for Sullivan. That's when he was hit, Marcus said, already knowing how the story ended. He was carrying Sullivan, back when a sniper got him. But here's the thing, son. He didn't stop. Even with a bullet in his chest, he kept carrying Sullivan until he got him to safety. Then he collapsed. Eddie's voice broke slightly. The last thing your father said was, "Tell my boy I love him, and that I'm proud of the man he's going to become." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of connection, of finally understanding the depth of his father's love and the weight of his sacrifice. Sullivan and Martinez both survived because of your dad, Eddie said. Sullivan became a teacher, had 3 kids of his own. Martinez started a construction company and employed dozens of veterans over the years. Your father's sacrifice rippled through all those lives. As Eddie finished his story, Marcus noticed that the Memorial Connections families had begun arriving. For their monthly meeting, Maria and Miguel approached the bench, followed by the other regular attendees and several new faces. Miguel ran up to Marcus with his usual enthusiasm. "Sergeant Marcus, we brought new friends today." Among the new arrivals was a young woman about Marcus's age, accompanied by 2 teenage daughters. There was also an older couple holding hands tightly, and a man in his 40s wearing a Vietnam veteran cap. "Everyone," Marcus said, standing to address the group, "I'd like you to meet Eddie Nakamura. He served with my father in Vietnam." The gathering took on a different energy with Eddie present. His stories about combat and brotherhood added a veteran's perspective that the families had been missing. When Tom Bradley arrived and saw Eddie, the 2 men embraced like old friends. "Eddie and I served in different units," Tom explained to the group, "but we met at a veterans reunion 10 years ago." Small world among Vietnam vets. As the meeting progressed, Marcus watched the interactions between the families with growing amazement. Janet Williams had taken the 2 teenage daughters under her wing, sharing wisdom about preserving family memories. Carmen Rodriguez was deep in conversation with the older couple about the challenges of dealing with military bureaucracy. Miguel, now comfortable in his role as the group's unofficial mascot, was showing his notebook to the man in the Vietnam veteran cap, who turned out to be honoring his son lost in Afghanistan. "This is incredible. The young woman with the teenage daughters said during a quiet moment. "I'm Rachel Stevens. My husband died in Syria 2 years ago. We've been struggling to find our place in civilian communities that don't really understand military loss." Maria nodded emphatically. "That's exactly why Marcus started this group. We understand each other here." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus realized that Memorial Connections had evolved beyond what he had originally envisioned. It wasn't just a support group anymore. It was becoming a chosen family for people who had lost their biological families to war. Eddie pulled Marcus aside. As the meeting was winding down, "Your father would be amazed by what you've created here," he said. "He always worried that his death would leave you without guidance. If he could see you now, leading this community, helping these families heal, I still feel like I don't." "Know what I'm doing," Marcus admitted. "None of us do, son. That's the secret of leadership. You figure it out as you go, and you lean on good people when you need help." After everyone left, Marcus remained at the memorial with Eddie, Tom, and Maria. Miguel had fallen asleep in his mother's lap, exhausted from a day of socializing and storytelling. "I have something for you," Eddie said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, tarnished harmonica. "Your father played this every night in Vietnam, said it reminded him of home." Marcus took the instrument with reverent hands. It was the first physical object he had ever held that his father had actually touched and used regularly. "He taught half the unit to play simple songs," Eddie continued. "Music kept our spirits up during the worst times. He always said he wanted to teach you to play someday." That night, Marcus sat in his apartment, holding the harmonica and reading through more of his father's letters. For the first time, he felt like he was getting to know James Thompson, not as a perfect military hero, but as a flawed, loving, hopeful young man who had dreams that were cut short by war. He put the harmonica to his lips and attempted to play. A simple melody. The sound was rough and uncertain, but it felt like a conversation across time. a son finally learning something his father had wanted to teach him. Outside his window, city lights twinkled like stars, and Marcus felt a presence he had never experienced before. Not the mythical hero he had imagined, but the loving father who had never stopped believing in the man his son would become. The community growing around the memorial was proof that his father's sacrifice had meaning beyond the immediate lives he had saved, was creating connections and healing that would ripple through generations. Just as Eddie had described his father's actions rippling through the lives of Sullivan and Martinez, Marcus finally understood that he wasn't just protecting a memorial, he was nurturing a legacy of love that refused to be conquered by death. 6 months after the first Memorial Connections meeting, the group had grown from 8 people to over 30 regular attendees. Word had spread through military communities across 3 states, and families made monthly pilgrimages to attend the gatherings. Marcus had to request permission to use the memorial's visitor center to accommodate the growing crowd. The transformation in individual families was remarkable. Miguel Rodriguez had blossomed from a withdrawn, confused child into a confident boy who spoke openly about his father and helped newer families feel welcome. Rachel Stevens had started a scholarship fund in her husband's name and was pursuing a master's degree in counseling to help military families professionally. Tom Bradley and Eddie Nakamura had become the group's unofficial elder statesmen, sharing decades of wisdom about surviving loss and finding purpose after tragedy. Their friendship had deepened as they discovered their shared commitment to honoring fallen soldiers through service to their families. But it was Marcus himself who had undergone the most profound transformation. Learning about his father from Eddie had unlocked something inside him that he hadn't even realized was closed. He had started taking evening classes in grief counseling and was considering making a career change from security to social work. On a crisp October morning, Marcus was surprised to find Colonel Peterson waiting for him at the memorial gates. The base commander looked unusually serious, and Marcus wondered if there had been complaints about the monthly gatherings. "Good morning, Colonel. Is everything all right?" "Walk with me, Thompson," Peterson said, gesturing toward the memorial wall. "I've been getting calls about your support group." Marcus's heart sank. He had tried to keep everything unofficial and separate from his security duties, but perhaps he had overstepped boundaries he wasn't aware of. "Sir, if there are concerns about the meetings, The calls have been from other military installations," Peterson interrupted. "Ah! They want to know how to start similar programs. Apparently, word has spread about what you're doing here." Relief flooded through Marcus. "Oh, that's unexpected." They stopped in front of the memorial wall, where David Rodriguez's name gleamed in the morning sunlight alongside thousands of others. "Thompson, I've been in the military for 28 years. I've seen a lot of programs come and go, a lot of good intentions that never quite work out. But what you've created here is different. It's organic, authentic, it's healing people." Marcus nodded, unsure where the conversation was heading. "I've been asked to recommend someone to develop a military-wide family support program based on your model. The Pentagon is interested in funding similar initiatives at major installations across the country." The magnitude of what Colonel Peterson was suggesting hit Marcus like a wave. "Sir, I'm just a security guard who started an informal support group. I don't have credentials in counseling or social work." "No, but you have something more valuable. You have lived experience and the ability to create genuine connections. The families trust you because you're one of them, not because you have degrees on your wall." Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself in a whirlwind of meetings with military officials, grief counselors, and program administrators. The Pentagon was serious about scaling up Memorial Connections. They wanted Marcus to lead the national initiative. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. He would have to leave his security position, move to Washington, D.C., and take on responsibilities far beyond anything he had ever imagined. But most difficult of all, he would have to leave the memorial that had been his anchor for 8 years. Eddie Nakamura found Marcus sitting alone by the memorial wall one evening, wrestling with his decision. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, son." Marcus smiled grimly. "Something like that." "Eddie, can I ask you something?" How do you know when you're ready for a challenge that scares you? Eddie settled onto the bench beside him. Your father faced that same choice the day he ran into enemy fire to save us. He was scared, we all were, but he knew it was the right thing to do. This is different. I'd be leaving everything familiar. Your father left everything familiar when he shipped to Vietnam. He left your mother, his job, his whole life because he believed it was important. Sometimes we have to trust that we're being called to something bigger than our comfort zone. The next Memorial Connections meeting was bittersweet. Marcus had decided to accept the Pentagon position, and he needed to tell the families who had become his chosen community. Miguel was the first to react when Marcus made his announcement. The 8-year-old's face crumpled with confusion and hurt. But Sergeant Marcus, you promised to take care of my daddy's name every day, he said, his voice trembling. Marcus knelt down to Miguel's level, fighting back his own emotions. I did. Promise that, buddy, and I meant it. But now I'm going to help take care of lots of daddies and mommies' names at memorials all across the country. And there will be other good people here to watch over your dad's name. Maria placed a protective hand on her son's shoulder. Miguel, remember what we talked about? Sometimes people have to go away to help more people, just like Daddy did. The room fell silent as the weight of Marcus's announcement settled over the group. These families had experienced too much loss already, and now they were facing another departure. Janet Williams, now in her mid-70s, but still sharp as ever, stood up slowly. Marcus Thompson, you listen to me? Your father died serving something bigger than himself. Now, you're being called to serve something bigger than yourself. We would be dishonoring his memory if we tried to hold you back. Tom Bradley nodded emphatically. The boy's right, Marcus. This group will continue because the foundation is strong. You taught us that we don't have to carry our grief alone. That lesson doesn't disappear when you leave. Rachel Stevens raised her hand tentatively. I've been thinking about getting more involved in leading activities. Maybe I could help coordinate meetings while you're transitioning. Carmen Rodriguez spoke up from across the circle. Eddie and Tom have enough stories and wisdom to keep us going for years. As the discussion continued, Marcus realized that Memorial Connections had grown beyond his leadership. The families had formed genuine bonds with each other. The community could survive his departure. Eddie Nakamura waited until the meeting was winding down before pulling Marcus aside. I have one more thing that belonged to your father, he said quietly. I was saving it for the right moment. He handed Marcus a small leather-bound journal. The cover was worn and stained, but Marcus could see his father's name written in faded ink on the front. Your dad kept a diary during his last month in Vietnam. He wrote in it every night before going to sleep. I've been carrying it for years, waiting to give it to you when you were ready. Marcus opened the journal with trembling hands. The pages were filled with his father's handwriting. Thoughts about the war, observations about his fellow soldiers, and page after page of letters written to a son he might never see again. One entry, dated just a week before his father's death, brought tears to Marcus's eyes. Dear Marcus, today I held a Vietnamese baby whose village we helped evacuate. She reminded me so much of what you must look like now. I wondered if someday you'll have the chance to help people the way I'm trying to help people here. I hope you'll find work that matters, son. Money and status don't mean much when you're lying in a foxhole wondering if you'll see another sunrise. What matters is knowing that your life has made a difference for someone else. As Marcus read his father's words, he knew with absolute certainty that accepting the Pentagon position was the right decision. 3 weeks later, on Marcus's last day as security guard at the memorial, the entire Memorial Connections community gathered for a special ceremony. Miguel had organized the whole thing, with help from his mother and grandmother. Each family had brought something to create a memory box for Marcus to take with him to Washington. There were photos, letters, small mementos, and drawings from children who had joined the group over the months. Miguel's contribution was a carefully handwritten letter that read, Dear Sergeant Marcus, thank you for helping me talk to my daddy and for being my friend. I know you have to go help other kids like me. I will take care of your daddy's name while you're gone. Love, Miguel Rodriguez, age 8. Colonel Peterson attended the ceremony and presented Marcus with a commendation for exceptional service to military families. But the words that meant the most came from Tom Bradley. Marcus, your father served his country by saving lives on a battlefield. You're serving your country by saving lives on a different kind of battlefield, the battlefield of grief and loss. He would be proud of the man you've become. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus walked alone to his father's name on the memorial wall. He placed his hand on the engraved letters and whispered, "I hope I'm ready for this, Dad." A gentle breeze rustled the trees around the memorial, and Marcus felt a sense of peace he had never experienced before. His father's harmonica was in his pocket, the journal was tucked safely in his briefcase, and his heart was full of love from the community he had helped create. He wasn't leaving the memorial behind. He was carrying its spirit with him to help heal families across the nation. The boy who had grown up without his father was about to become a father figure for countless children who needed guidance through their own journeys of loss and healing. As Marcus walked away from the memorial for the last time as its security guard, he carried with him the knowledge that love truly doesn't end with death. It just changes form and finds new ways to touch the world. 2 years later, Marcus stood in Arlington National Cemetery on a cold November morning, watching his families gathered for the dedication of a new memorial pavilion. The structure was beautiful in its simplicity, curved stone walls with engraved names, surrounded by gardens where families could sit and remember their loved ones. This was the 15th Memorial Connection site to open across the country, and Marcus felt the familiar mix of pride and humility that accompanied each new launch. What had started as an informal support group at one military memorial had grown into a national network serving thousands of military families. His role as National Director of Military Family Memorial Services had taken him to installations from Alaska to Florida, but every dedication ceremony brought him back to that first afternoon when he met Maria and Miguel Rodriguez. Speaking of Miguel, Marcus smiled as he spotted the now 10-year-old boy weaving through the crowd with his characteristic energy. The Rodriguez family had driven 8 hours to attend today's ceremony, and Miguel had appointed himself as Marcus's unofficial assistant for the event. "Sergeant Marcus," Miguel called out, using the name he stubbornly refused to change despite Marcus's new civilian title. "My mom says you're going to give a big speech today." Marcus ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "Not too big, buddy. Just thanking people for making this place possible." Over the past 2 years, Miguel had grown into a confident, articulate child who often spoke at Memorial Connections meetings about his father's service. His innocent wisdom and natural empathy had helped countless other children navigate their own grief journeys. Maria approached with her usual warm smile, but Marcus noticed something different about her appearance. She was glowing with a happiness he hadn't seen since before David's death. "Marcus, I want you to meet someone," she said, taking the arm of a tall, gentle-looking man beside her. "This is James Patterson. He's been attending our Memorial Connections meetings in San Antonio for the past year." Marcus shook hands with James, immediately recognizing the look in his eyes. It was the same expression of loss mixed with hope that all their group members carried. "James lost his wife in Afghanistan," Maria continued. "She was a combat medic. We've been supporting each other through the healing process." Marcus felt a surge of joy for Maria. The idea that 2 people could find love and healing through the community he had helped create felt like the most natural and beautiful outcome possible. "Dad, James is going to be my stepdad," Miguel announced matter-of-factly. "He's teaching me to play guitar, and he knew my real dad's friend Rodriguez from a different unit." The casual way Miguel referred to Dad James, while still honoring his biological father's memory, struck Marcus as the healthiest response to loss and new love he had ever witnessed. As the dedication ceremony began, Marcus looked out at the crowd and marveled at how much had changed since that first meeting. Tom Bradley was there, now serving as a regional coordinator for Memorial Connections. Eddie Nakamura sat in the front row, proudly wearing his Vietnam veteran cap. Janet Williams, now 81, had become the program's most requested speaker for Gold Star Mother events, but it was the new faces that moved Marcus most. Young widows finding their voices, children learning that grief didn't have to be carried alone, parents discovering that their child's sacrifice had meaning beyond their personal loss. When Marcus stepped to the podium, he felt the weight of his father's journal in his jacket pocket. He had started carrying it to every ceremony as a reminder of why this work mattered. 2 years ago, he began, I was a security guard who thought his job was to protect a piece of stone and metal. I thought memorials were about preserving the past. What I've learned is that memorials are actually about creating the future. He gestured toward the families gathered before him. Every person here represents love that refuses to die, service that continues beyond death, and healing that transforms pain into purpose. Our loved ones died in service to something greater than themselves. By creating these communities, by supporting each other through grief, raising our children to understand sacrifice and service, we ensure that their deaths create life. During his speech, Marcus noticed a commotion in the back of the gathering. A young soldier in dress uniform was walking quickly toward the memorial wall, tears streaming down his face. Behind him, an older couple struggled to keep up. Marcus paused his speech as he recognized the signs of someone experiencing overwhelming grief. The soldier appeared to be in his early 20s, and his desperate search along the memorial wall suggested he was looking for a specific name. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped down from the podium and approached the young soldier. "Can I help? You find someone?" The soldier turned, and Marcus saw raw pain in his eyes. "My brother," he said, his voice breaking. "Staff Sergeant Michael Chen. He died in Syria last month. They told me his name would be here, but I can't." Marcus placed a gentle hand on the soldier's shoulder. "What's your name, son?" "Private David Chen." He was supposed to be my best man next month. I don't know how to do this without him." The older couple reached them, and Marcus immediately recognized them as David's parents. The mother clutched a folded flag, and the father's military bearing couldn't hide his profound grief. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen?" Marcus asked gently. "I'm Marcus Thompson, Director of Memorial Connections. Let me help you find your son's name." As they walked along the memorial wall together, Marcus felt the familiar stirring of purpose that had guided him from that first conversation with Miguel. Here was another family beginning their journey through loss, and he had the privilege of helping them take their first steps toward healing. They found Michael Chen's name in the newest section of engravings. David Chen reached out to touch the letters, and his legs buckled. Marcus and the boy's father caught him as he fell to his knees in front of his brother's name. "He was going to teach my kids to play baseball," David whispered. "He promised he'd be there for all the important things." Mrs. Chen knelt beside her surviving son and wrapped her arms around him. "He will be there, sweetheart. Love doesn't end with death, it just changes form." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Those were almost the exact words his father had written in his journal, and the exact lesson he had learned through his journey with Memorial Connections. As the Chen family grieved together in front of the memorial wall, Miguel Rodriguez quietly approached and offered David Chen his small notebook. "You can draw your brother if you want," Miguel said simply. "It helps me talk to my dad." David Chen looked at the 8-year-old boy with wonder and acceptance. "You lost your dad in Afghanistan?" "But Sergeant Marcus taught me that our daddies are still with us in here," Miguel said, pointing to his heart. "Dadly sent us each other so we don't have to be sad alone." Marcus watched as Miguel, with the natural wisdom of a child who had learned to transform pain into compassion, began to guide David Chen through the first steps of healing. The cycle was continuing, with those who had been helped becoming helpers themselves. As the dedication ceremony concluded and families began to leave, Marcus remained at the memorial wall with the Chen family. He knew they would need time to process their grief, and he wanted them to know about the Memorial Connections meeting scheduled for the following weekend. But more than that, he wanted them to understand that they had just witnessed something miraculous. A security guard who had spent years protecting a memorial had discovered that the real protection came from community, love, and the unbreakable bonds between those who understand loss. Miguel ran up to Marcus's one final time before leaving with his family. "Sergeant Marcus, do you think my dad knows about all the people we're helping?" Marcus knelt down and looked into the boy's serious eyes. "I think he not only knows, Miguel, I think he's proud." I think he and all our loved ones are working together to make sure we find each other when we need help the most. As the sun set over Arlington National Cemetery, Marcus stood alone at the memorial wall where his journey had begun years earlier. His father's name wasn't engraved on this particular wall, but James Thompson's legacy lived in every family that had found healing through memorial connections. A simple medal may have fallen to the ground decades ago. What Marcus had lifted up was deeper than pride. He had lifted up love, community, healing, and hope. And in doing so, he had discovered that the greatest way to honor the dead is to help the living find their way back to life. In his pocket, his father's harmonica caught the last rays of sunlight. And Marcus knew that the music of love and service would continue long after he was gone, carried forward by all the lives that had been touched by the simple act of refusing to grieve alone.